Hello, everyone. My name is Erasmus, and welcome to another episode of the Shaft Sports. So today we are going to be talking about Rúben Amorim's Manchester United. So off the back of the Manchester Derby, where I think it's now 8 wins in however many games for Rúben Amorim, with the lowest win percentage compared to some of United's other unsuccessful coaches. And after that result against Manchester City at the weekend, there is renewed pressure in Manchester. But when you scan the horizon and you listen to the news, you realize that one thing keeps coming up again and again. What exactly is the problem with Manchester United? What exactly is the problem with Amorim's team? I think previously there's been lots of discussions and diagnosis into what exactly is wrong with the team. And I think when Rúben Amorim took over, there was a sense of goodwill amongst the fans that this was a manager that they wanted to give the room and the time in order for him to implement his tactics, given that it has been very, very successful with Sporting Lisbon, where he coached for so many years. So when the results just aren't going your way, it is very easy to put it up on the players. It is very easy to put it up on a number of different structures and many other things in there. But within this season, we've seen him being given his players that he demanded, which are very specific for the system. We've seen him being given the room to be able to trim the squad and let go of many players, thereby trying to resolve the issue around some of the players who weren't committed to the club, who weren't willing partakers in the new culture that he was trying to create. So after all of these exits and after all of these changes, what exactly is the problem with Manchester United? And like I said, if you observe the chat across the different TV channels, one of the things that people keep pointing out to is the system and the tactics which is being employed by Rúben Amorim. Just for context, this is a 3-4-3 system which relies on 3 center backs, 2 wing backs, 2 midfielders, and then a forward 3 who look to press very high up the pitch, try to play very aggressive. And they try and form a box within the midfield by pushing up their center backs into those spaces and thereby trying to gain a little bit of control. It is quite unconventional compared to other 3-4-3s by other managers like Conte, like other managers like Tuchel, which we've seen in the past. And I think we'll get to start talking about some of these things. But the question here today is, and the question I would like to answer is, what exactly is the problem at Manchester United? Is this simply the structure, or is there something deeper going on? And we're going to explore that within this episode. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. It would really, really help us. And I also want to hear your thoughts as to what exactly you think is the problem with Rúben Amorim's Manchester United. Great. Now I want us to rewind just a little bit. I want us to look at the past when Ten Hag came in. He came in with a specific promise that there was a modern style of Ajax football, which we've seen with the side, which is going to be proactive, attacking, high pressing, young players who were going to be developed into stars. And at the start, it really felt like United finally had an identity. They had the Carabao Cup win, some big results, and a sense of optimism swept through the entire fan base. But then the cracks appeared. The football in itself was not consistent. The young, exciting style really never showed up towards the end. And it felt like United was grinding results after results more than playing convincing football. And when things went south, people suddenly realized that there is no style to fall back on. And one of the things which he had been criticized for a lot was that there were so many changes within the team. His tactics was almost unrecognizable, save the fact that he relied very much on young players like he had done with Ajax and brought out players like Garnacho, etc. Even when we dial it back a bit to look at Ole's era, Yes, this was also flawed, but there were big stretches of belief, big wins against some of the top sides. I remember that he had Pep on the ropes, consistently beating Pep Guardiola, even at the Etihad Stadium, which means a match like what happened on Sunday is one which Ole would probably have won. And there was a sense that the players themselves were enjoying themselves and they were enjoying the freedom that came. But once again, once the losses came, there was no joy, no trust, just disappointment, especially because of the style of football. And that's when calls for change did happen. And there's a reason for which I am referencing these two managers and given the kind of context which I am giving here, because I think it is more than just producing the results. I think in both of these scenarios, you can understand that results in themselves is able to buy you some time. But there is a deep underlying belief, especially amongst Manchester United fans, and I would say even a level of expectation that it's not just about how you win, but it's about winning in a good way, winning by playing good football. It is not just enough to scrape wins, win after win, struggling within games. It is just not enough. But results maybe can buy you time for a while whilst you still try to implement these things, which means once you get the results, there is an expectation that you move towards the next stage of the cycle, which I don't think happened, especially under Ole. So then the question that we need to ask over here is that when United turned to Rúben Amorim, especially after Ten Hag, what was the kind of change that they were looking for? Was this the right kind of change, or was it just another layer in a cycle of constant reinvention that has already exhausted the squad? And I'm going to ask three questions over here. Is Amorim's problem that his tactics are too radical for this group? Or is the squad itself broken after years and years of failed promises? And deeper still, is this just growing pains, or we are heading nowhere? Is there some promise in the pains in which we are seeing within the results now? And is it likely to improve, or it is time to stop the train now because we are going nowhere? In order to answer some of these questions, we need to look at a couple of things. First of all, Amorim at Sporting, because if he was not a good coach and if he did not have the results which were needed, he wouldn't be getting the job in the first place. So let's not forget, Amorim is not just some random experiment. At Sporting Lisbon, he was almost transformational, taking over a club which was in desperate need of change, which also had history and legacy, and probably was wallowing in waters where it didn't deserve to be. He took over in 2020 when they hadn't won the league for the last 19 years. What he did was to bring in a lot of academy graduates, built a system around energy and youth, and in his first season, they conceded just 20 goals in 34 games, which was the best defensive record in Europe's 10 leagues. So he is someone who has a CV, who has a profile, which is very specific. Not in the sense that he has won the most titles, but in the sense that he has shown the ability to transform a football club, not just the set of players or the football which is being played on the pitch, but to transform the football club and put it at the very top. Because in just the last 5 years, he's raised Sporting Lisbon from a team which won the title last 19 years ago to a team that wins back-to-back titles and is top in Spain and consistently performs within the Champions League. I think with this context in mind, there is a lot of reason and optimism, and it's quite also clear the objective for which he was brought into Manchester United. But we also need to recognize the reason why this worked. And I think this is where you begin to feel some of the points which I'm trying to put forward. Because this result which is being expected of him, or this outcome which is being expected of him, which is raising a legacy club from its ruins and putting it to the very top, is one which requires a level of change and overhaul that can sometimes be very, very disruptive. If you listen to what I said, first, the changes were made within the Sporting Academy. It didn't start with the first team. And there was a lot of trust given to the players whom he had coached. And by the way, I think he coached within the academy, players he had coached at that level and giving them the opportunity to shine. And the club also had a strategy of signing promising young players by showing confidence in them and not just buying ready-made stars. This is key because it means that Amorim has a preference. And if you look at the way he wants to die by his ideology, you could see that he has a preference for his ability to lay the fundamentals of what his style of football is within the minds of these players. Secondly, there was an alignment of the entire club's infrastructure to be able to facilitate those goals. So you realize scouting, recruitment, all aligned to his vision, and he was known to personally pick out some of the players which the club eventually bought. And he didn't just do this by things that he did on the field. He did it through creating a structure and a culture of stability which has been able to transform the club. He was involved in extending contracts, gave a lot of visibility to the youth. And even when there was so much change, because one of the stories that you hear about Amorim is that when there was so much change and upheaval, he made a promise to himself that he was going to stick to this method. And I mean, we're going to come to the remnants of what we're already hearing now, that he was going to stick with this method. And it actually worked. By sticking with it, it actually worked. He actually even threatened to resign at one point in time. And it worked in the sense that Sporting was able to get to the place where it is now. And I think that he didn't shy away from this in the way in which he set the expectations and the way in which he had a massive buy-in from those players. So why is United's change not working? And I think there are two variables over here, right? Because this is not a one-man project. This is a collaboration between two entities. So looking at Amorim in his pure state, we also need to look at the club which he came to take over. And the direction that I want to go with this point is that United, ever since Alex Ferguson left, has been pulled in it's a squad that has been pulled in a lot of different directions. We had Ole's pragmatism. We had, Mourinho's pragmatism. We had Ole's counterattacks. We had Rangnick's gang pressing. We had Louis van Gaal, who came in with his own style of football, and also David Moyes, who tried to institute his levels of change. So what you realize also with this squad is that a lot of the players post-Ferguson are still present. Either they are remnants of them through the different phases of the squad, or either there are remnants of them through the different phases of the squad, but at every point in time, any manager who has come in has had to pick up a squad which is mainly that of the previous coach. Now, 5 managers in 7 years who come with their own tactical blueprints. And I think Rashford addressed this in his interview with Gary Lineker, who says that when you keep being pulled in different directions, you end up having no identity. What happens when there is so much change, even from an organizational perspective, and bringing some of my experience in from the corporate world? There is just that amount of change which is likely going to break individuals. There is just a level of change fatigue which most likely comes when there is a lot of change within a short period of time. And it is not lost on me that this is even possible with a football club, and the fact that these are players doesn't change the fact that it is their careers, it is their jobs, and they do have a corporation which is setting the rules for how they need to adapt and how they need to perform. Think about it in your job. Imagine that a new training program came out at the start of the year. And after you learned it, you were getting used to it, it was changed again by the second quarter. By the third quarter, it was said that this probably is not working and we should probably change again. You are going to feel a lot of the frustration. It is very likely that the next set of change which comes in is not going to impact you in the way in which it should have impacted you, no matter how good or well-intentioned that level of change is. Why is this so? Because too much change too fast, constant new systems, setting new expectations, new players, new styles with insufficient time to settle in can obviously wear people down. But secondly, there is a lack of clarity or trust that then comes, especially when the change is backed wholly from the beginning, which means that there is a sense that the proponents of the change in itself have no idea as to how exactly to fix those situations. There is also a mismatch between people and their expectations, because if you have a core group of people, and when I say core group of people, I do not just mean the players who are on the pitch, I mean the staff, people who are cooking food, because all of these things, like I mentioned in the beginning, need to be very much aligned to the philosophy and the direction in which the new manager wants to go to. So if you have them used to doing one thing and you ask them to unlearn that much and adapt to completely different profiles, that in itself can be very, very draining. But not only so, it puts a laser focus on their performance metrics. And this in itself builds a lot of performance pressure, because the feeling is that we have provided everything that you need. And I remember this so many times that most of the times, the parents who had kids and put a lot of expectations on them, most of the parents thought they were doing a good thing by providing everything that the kid needed, or everything that the kid asked for in order for them to succeed at life. There is still the possibility that they don't, because obviously you remove all of the variables and you put a lot of attention on the individual to perform. All of those things, with the resources which you've provided to them, immediately switches and becomes a signal that they need to perform, that the duty is on them to perform, which that in itself is not a bad thing, but misses that there is a lot of factors that go in, even from a human perspective, to be able to do this. So if we apply this to United, their core players, their players, their staff, the culture, and a lot of the problems which has been mentioned in the past is psychological, maybe almost even spiritual, according to De Gea. So what Amarin perhaps needs is a balance of innovation and continuity in order to be able to establish these things. And I'm going to come into it in the next point. Because the dilemma here is the tactics versus the squad that he has. Because is he failing because his tactics don't fit the squad, or because the squad in itself is mentally broken? And it might feel ridiculous saying this, given that he's been given the license to sign his new set of players. But even if I look at the signings which he's made, which is Cunha and Mbeumo, all of these are very good signings. It still doesn't fit the bill for how he has been able to lead his transformation. At this base, you are expecting players who have certain skills and having a level of expectation that they would be able to transform these things to fit the specific instructions which you have given. But what made them good, what made them score 25 goals for you to buy them, is not how they are playing now. And therefore, they would need to unlearn the things which made them successful, which sometimes I would argue even makes it harder to learn new things. That would also mean that there is a window of time which is required, no matter the ability of the player, to come in to learn these things and move forward. So even when there are new players, it is still likely that this would exist. But you still do realize that, and this is the second factor that I want to point in, that the speed at which they want to do this, and I know even at Sporting Lisbon, he did this very, very quickly, but the speed at which they've had to do this and the level at which they've had to do this means that there is little room for variation and flexibility. And what do I mean? What do I mean by that? It meant that they've had to take quick decisions on the fly. You need a striker who can play the system. You cannot wait for 2 seasons to find the right striker. You cannot wait for 3 seasons to groom the right striker from the academy. So you have to make do and compromise within the market. So it's still likely that there are players that he brings in who may not completely fit the bill. But I don't want it to sound like it's all just excuses, but think of the plethora of possibilities which most likely happens from here. The backroom staff. And even a lot of these players who have still been there, players like Luke Shaw, who've played under all of these managers, they can come up, they can still give off their best, But there are a lot of players who are playing over there with the broken belief that any change or anything is possible. And no matter how much they want to master this, it still can be a very, very significant problem. But that being said, you can still argue that Amorim has brought a lot of these problems onto himself by playing players out of positions, which is one of the main criticisms which has been leveled against him. But I want you to reflect that against the earlier points that I made, which is to the extent to which he's having to make do. And you don't need to take my word for it. You can see that is the level of thinking that is going into his decision making. That because I do not have the perfect fit for this, I have to make do with the best players that I have. Let me give you an example. So, for example, in midfield, one of the things which has been pointed out is his tool in midfield, where the players he plays in there has been criticized. So, for example, playing Bruno Fernandes within a deeper role, he's probably best up the top of the field. But if he was to go up the top of the field, that means he is displacing one of the more talented players within the squad. And not only so, he is probably also missing a lot of the creativity which is required from the players who he wants to play within that specific position. And therefore, he always has to make these compromises on different parts of the pitch. He cannot bring in all of his centre backs. He probably has a lot of centre backs who have been there beforehand and will be forced to have to play this style. So I've already given some of the problems as to why the consistent change within United and the variable, which is Manchester United, probably hasn't set the right conditions for this man to thrive. Not to the level at which I use this as an excuse, but to open up your mind to the possibilities to try and understand what is going on, or try and understand the rationale or thinking behind this. Because I think a lot of the questions that we've had on this platform is, why is he still doing what he's doing? Why has he not changed? And I think for me, that's the more interesting question. And that is why I wanted to go deep down into what change means in this context and why perhaps he's still sticking with this. So, as what United is going through, 8 wins in 30 odd games, 2 or 3 losses just at the start of the season, and it's still very early in the season. United can go on and still have a very, very good season. So, is this just growing pains, or this is sign of disaster coming? And I think at the heart of this dilemma, we do realize that a certain level of change is needed. But my proposition is that this change cannot just be surface level or a swap. It most likely has to be something holistic. With this in mind, you can imagine that the level of pains which is being felt now can be attributed to the growing pains of learning. I think there is a huge degree of that, regardless of if all of the conditions has been set. Because I think it is sometimes quite a lazy narrative to just say we've provided him with all of the right resources and he should be out there doing wonders. He should have no excuses and he should go out there to perform. Think of my analogy with the parents buying stuff for the child. More so, and I want to point this out, I think this understanding is also within the United executive hierarchy, because they do understand that for these results to come in, it needs to take some time, and they do look like they are quite prepared to stick by him from everything which they've said, which means they do understand some of these conditions, which means that they do understand some of these constraints which he's been forced to build under. My worry with this entire thing is the mindset which he's going to hold, because someone said if United was able to have a very quiet season and sort of enjoy their rebuild, no one reacting over results, they probably would be able to get where they get to. I think the main difference here is that the level of reaction which you get from trying something like this at Manchester United far outweighs what most likely you would get at Sporting. And it depends on if the manager continues to hold faith. But I think this is where I fear things may go wrong, because the manager may hold faith, for as long as possible. But once the players begin to lose faith, you most likely would continue to see some of the bad results which we are having in here. So there is no clear answer to this question. The things we've been able to establish here is that there is some element of growing pains which we cannot deny is happening. The question is, how much would it impact the mentality or the ability of the squad to be able to withstand? And that is where all of my fears with regards to so much change happening and how much it can affect the psychology of the players does come in. And I think the point at which that is broken, then it is almost inevitable that management will need to react. And I think the point at which they are prepared to stick with him would require them being able to withstand the pressure as much as possible. And I think that's the worst case scenario for a lot of Manchester United fans. But I propose the alternative is probably much, much worse. Because if new change was to come in, that would also require its time to be able to develop itself. I think you are unable to make a clear determination as to what this direction will go. So I think the next set of weeks, the next set of games will play a key role in here. That being said, if I was to, I mean, of course, I'm not a coach or a pundit or anything, but if I was to look at this, especially from my experience from organizations, and recommend what needs to happen, like I said, surface changes are impossible to create the level of impact which he would want to have with the squad. But at the same time, it does help. Incremental changes does help in order to establish confidence within the squad and belief in the tactics and the approach and the project which you do have. And when you do not have the luxury of being able to institute radical changes, then some of these surface changes need to be done in the right way to facilitate the buy-in of the players into the larger objectives which you have within the club, which means you need to get results and you need to get them very, very quickly. Which also means once you start getting results, it is important that you do not just focus on those results. And it's important that the fan base builds the patience to recognize that it's not just about the results and that there is a larger goal at play over here. Thank you all so much. My name is Erasmus. Please subscribe to the Shaft Podcast. A number of you continue to watch our channel and you like it. We want to hear from you. What do you think about some of the analysis that we put out here? We want to hear you engage with some of them. Send us your questions, the next set of topics that you want us to discuss or talk about on this channel. We really love to hear from you. Please like, please subscribe, and see you soon. Ciao.